Hey there, Timberwolves. Miss Robolino coming in with our final lesson. We are going to be working on the remaining 7 principles for our Constitution. So just to remind you where we were, we started on February 12th with limited government. We then moved on after the storm to the 23rd with separation of powers, then checks and balances. And the 25th, we did federalism. And today we are going to be finishing up with individual rights, republicanism, and popular sovereignty. So follow along with me as I go through each one. Additionally, I do want to let you know that I put up videos up on Canvas for you to look at to help you with understanding republicanism, popular sovereignty, and individual rights. Please remember, I'm available for tutorials if you need me to help you through this. Next week, we start learning about the Bills of Rights. Remember, on Friday, the 26th, we have an open note quiz on government, which is going to be looking at the types of government like checks and balances, separation of powers. Okay, so please make sure you take a look over those notes. So starting off with today, some warm up that I have for you is pick one level of government, federal, state, or local, and describe the structure and responsibilities of that level of government. So for those of you who have done this already, there are different types of government that we learned during federalism. So the federal government is the top government, where we're going to go ahead and see those 3 branches. And each one has a specific job to be able to do, where the legislative is to create the laws, the executive is to enforce the laws, and the judicial is to interpret the laws. At state, we also see that there is another government, and the state government oversees the local governments, where federal oversees the state governments as well as the local governments, because their law is supreme. State governments are going to have, again, a legislative, a executive, and a judicial. For the state, the judicial was going to be dealing with civil cases, things that deal with civilians, anything that has to do with federal, which means laws like going into someone's mail is a federal offense that will be taken over by the federal courts. Whereas state, if there was a car accident and someone wanted to go ahead and take that person to court, that would be inside of a state court. Then we have our local governments. Our local governments are going to be below the state governments. Those will be our municipalities or our special districts, and those types of governments have to go ahead and follow the state and federal laws. Below those would be the people, and we would follow those particular laws. So remember, there is a video on federalism that helps break this up for you, as well as my last recorded video on federalism. So let's go ahead and let's start with our first one. So our first one is popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is one of my favorite words, and we have had this multiple times. This will be your 4th time coming into this word. So popular sovereignty means the people are the source of the power in the government. And in this state, we're seeing that the people have the power because they are voting. They vote. And the example of this would be the Kansas-Nebraska Act right before the Civil War. So at this time, as states were being admitted into the United States, Kansas and Nebraska were getting people to vote whether they should come into the United States as a free state or a slave state. So again, that shows popular sovereignty. I do want to have an opportunity to break down what popular sovereignty means. So popular means the people, and sovereign or sovereignty means a ruler, someone who reigns. So when you break it down, people rule. That's popular sovereignty. So the people rule. For us as the United States, which brings us to our next principle, is going to be republicanism. So the popular sovereignty for the United States is a republic. So if you remember, we have a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, the republic. So as you can see, the republic is where people elect their representatives to carry out their will, whereas it is going to be a little different when you think of democracy. Direct democracy is when every person inside that city, that country, that state votes, and then the majority rules. Here, republicanism is a little bit different. Republicanism is an indirect democracy where people, which is us, elect someone who we feel is going to represent us in the federal and the state and local levels of the federal and state governments. So I want you to remember, when you look at republicanism, look at rep for representative. I would like you to underline the REP or put a box around it so you can always remember that. So an example of this would be the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives, again, are elected by the people, and the number of representatives we have is 435, depending on the population of the state, whereas the Senate makes up 100, 2 representatives from each state. Now, some things to remember: each of these jobs has a term, which means that the people who are chosen to be the representatives only do it for a certain amount of time. They get, for example, the Senate gets 6 years, House of Representatives gets 2 years, our president gets 4 years, and our mayor, I believe, does 2 years. I'll have to double check that though. And what happens is those people will have to go ahead and rerun to go ahead and represent the people inside of the state, the local, or the federal governments. And in the end, going back to my federalism, you remember the pyramid that I asked you guys to write down, where the people were on top. The people decide who represents them in the federal government, which brings me to the point of the legislative branch. The legislative branch works in the Capitol building, and the Capitol building is known as the People's House. The reason why it's known as the People's House is because the people elect those representatives inside for them to decide the laws, to make the laws, to represent the people's interests. So that is republicanism. All right, let's go ahead to our last one, but first let's go ahead and let's have our brain teaser. Okay, list 5 rights you know that you have as a citizen. What would you do if these rights were taken away? Take a moment and think, what rights do you have as a citizen? Well, I mean, many of us have the right to vote, obviously, with republicanism. We have the right to be able to express ourselves. For example, you are able to come into school wearing the clothes that you want, that represent your personality. Of course, keeping in mind that it is within dress code. That again is going back to federalism. The school again has a code of conduct as well as a dress code that has to be applied to all schools. So you can go ahead and express yourself all you want with your clothes as long as it is within the dress code regulations. Okay, so we will be going over our Bill of Rights on Monday to see what other ones we have. So can you imagine what would it be like inside of Wood Creek Junior High if we were to go ahead and implement uniforms? How would that be? How would you feel? So just go ahead and kind of think about that. So our last principle is individual rights. And I want you to kind of really pay attention to this. So individual rights are rights that are given to people or are already there when they are born. So the Constitution protects these individual rights that people have, such as our right to freedom, our right of speech, our right of religion, and our right to a trial by jury. If you remember, going back to limited government, there was nothing but monarchies in the beginning. And if you remember, a monarchy is when one person rules, like a king or a queen. And that person basically decides all branches of the government. For example, they go ahead and they make the laws. They execute the laws, and they determine whether you are guilty or innocent. How could that look like if one person has all that power? There will obviously be prejudice and bias involved, and it's never going to be fair. So at least with republicanism, we're able to go ahead and protect our individual rights the best we can. So in the US, we have the Bill of Rights, which is an example of our individual rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments in our Constitution. We'll be learning about that on Monday. So these rights are given to all the people, okay? Even if you're not a citizen, you have individual rights. And those rights are known as unalienable rights or natural rights, rights that you have that you are born with. Your right to life, your right to liberty, which is freedom, and your pursuit of happiness. In fact, after World War II with the Holocaust, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of Theodore Roosevelt, got with many nations and worked on the rights for all people. And it is called the Declaration of Human Rights. And this is accepted by the United Nations in all the countries that are part of the United Nations. The United Nations goes around the world trying to go ahead and make sure that people in other countries are getting their rights, their human rights. So tomorrow I will go ahead and just kind of introduce a couple of these, but there are 30 of them. Feel free to go to the UN.org and take a look at the Declaration of Human Rights. It's pretty interesting to kind of take a look at and read and see what your human rights are. Well, Timberwolves, that's all I have for you today. Very quick lesson, just going over those principles. Please make sure you write them down in the appropriate area of your foldable. If you remember, you've been filling out your foldable all the way through. For the remainder of you who are in KVA, that would be in your ISN on slide 4. You will just kind of be putting it in. If you have any questions, reach out to me and I'll be available. It's always great, Timberwolves, to go ahead and leave these there for you. Feel free to send me emails, leave some comments, and I will see you tomorrow. Y'all take care. Bye.